Hello students, this is Matthew Ruiz, and today we're going to look at Chapter 5, which is Nutrition for Wellness. This is a pretty long chapter, so let's get started and have a lot of information here to give you. The interesting thing about nutrition is you could take a course in it, you could get an undergrad degree in it, you could get your master's, you could get a PhD in it, which amounts to about 10 years worth of education in nutrition if you wanted to do that. We're going to try to cover it all here in about 45 minutes or so. So just know that we're leaving out a lot more than what we're actually giving you. But this is a good introduction if you've never studied nutrition before. So as I did in my previous video, feel free and please pause if you need to take notes, rewind or whatnot to be sure that you get everything. So we're going to look at several different points in this chapter. Everything from what does nutrition look like? There are 6 nutrients that the body needs. We'll break those down and tell you a little bit more about those. Food groups, standards, all those sorts of things. Talk a little bit about my plate towards the end. Then we'll wrap it up with some issues with eating, things like disordered eating and other medical problems. Just briefly touch on some myths and stuff and look at some dietary guidelines for Americans. Should also mention that everything that we kind of talk about as far as how much you should get of certain things and different things like that is relative to the average person. So if you have needs, if you're an athlete, for instance, and need to eat more, if you have certain dietary restrictions, then your particular plan for eating and for your diet, how much you need of certain nutrients and stuff, is going to be a little bit different than what we talk about here today. What we're talking about is just in general. What does the average person in America need? So when we talk about nutrition, all that we're really talking about, it is a science. There's a lot of chemistry, and it just relates to food and how that relates to our health and our performance. Nutrition is key to good health. In fact, if you're trying to lose weight, as many people in America are, probably turns out that exercise is about 30% of that equation and diet is 70% of that equation. What you eat, how much you eat, makes a huge difference in your overall health and well-being. So proper nutrition, it gives you important things. You have to have certain nutrients to make your body function. Everything about your body, the only fuel it gets is stuff that you ingest. Our bodies do not make fuel or nutrients. We have to take them in our diet. So in that, from our perspective, from a physical wellness kind of standpoint, we need enough fuel or substrates to give you the energy to do whatever it is that you need to do, whether that's work, exercise, or even enough to relax. In our country, food availability is not the problem. We have plenty of food per person. Now, this is a uniquely first world problem to have, and obviously not every country in the world has this issue, as there are lots of countries that do not have enough food. That is not the case in America. In general, we've got plenty. So the problem is not at having availability. The problem is eating too much of the wrong stuff. And we'll talk about what that is and the stuff that you should try to avoid or minimize and what you should get more of. So bad nutrition can lead to a lot of diseases, and we'll look at some of those here in just a minute. So particularly the chronic diseases, the things that are killing Americans. So lots of things that deal with the heart: atherosclerosis, coronary heart disease. Those are all problems with the heart. High blood pressure, another associated one, and then kind of the big 3 of obesity, in which 2/3 of Americans are either overweight or obese, diabetes, and osteoporosis, which is a bone issue. All of these things here that are listed have a dietary component, or if your diet is better and your intake of certain nutrients is better, you start to minimize the risk of some of those different diseases. So there are different types of nutrients. There are 6. And you can think of these in kind of 2 different categories. Overall, they're all essential, meaning that you have to get them from the environment through our food. 3 are energy-providing nutrients, and 3 are not energy-providing nutrients. So here are the 6: carbs, fats, proteins. Those give you energy. And vitamins, minerals, and water do not, although are equally important. They just have a different job. We can also think of this in terms of macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are things that you need more of. And you typically think of carbs, fats, proteins, water as your macronutrients. You need a lot of those in relative proportions to things like vitamins and minerals, which would be micronutrients, some of which you may only need micrograms or 1/1,000,000th of a gram per day of some particular minerals. The other way we can think about it that's not in the notes is by food groups. So fruit and vegetables, meats, dairy, that sort of thing. That's kind of more the common man way of thinking about it. We tend to think of it more of a scientific way with these different groups up here with carbs, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water. We can also think of them by the amount of nutrients per calorie. So if something is high nutrient dense, that means it has a lot of good stuff in it per calories. So you think of something like a banana. Banana is going to run you between 100 and 120 calories, but you get a lot of nutrients with that. And you can compare that to low nutrient density food, which would be something like junk food. So you eat a Snickers bar. There's not a whole lot of good stuff there, despite the commercials, to keep you from being Betty White. There's not a lot of good stuff there, right? It's junk food, not a lot of nutrient density per calorie. Okay, so the next few slides, we're going to break down the 6 different groups. And we always start with carbohydrates, which I could just call carbs for short. They kind of get a bad rap nowadays, but do hear this. Carbs are not your enemy. Maybe the type of carbohydrate in your diet should change, but carbohydrates in general are not bad. Okay? And here's why. These are your primary source of calories. All right? Calories are what you need in order to do the work that your body has to do. It's a measure of heat, right? You're a toasty 98.6 degrees. Your body is burning calories all day long. You have to have calories in order to live. The primary source of these calories, the primary source of energy, are carbohydrates. You use it for a lot of stuff. You use it to do work, and we mean metabolic work in this case. So when you go out and run and do exercise, lift weights, play basketball, whatever it happens to be, you're doing work, and it takes energy to do that. And carbohydrates give you the primary source for that. Also, things that you don't see going on, like cell maintenance, and then again producing the heat that your body uses in order to maintain itself. So if you look in terms of grams, a gram, by the way, is just a unit of weight. And a gram weight is about the weight of a paperclip. So 1 gram of carbohydrate will get you 4 calories. So if you eat a 100 gram something, then you've got 400 calories from that, just in carbohydrates from that 100 grams. Also helps to regulate fat and metabolize protein. So carbohydrates have several functions, all of which are very important. Where do you get these guys from? So these are coming from breads, cereals. These are coming from fruits and vegetables. These also come from milk and other types of dairy products. So these are the things that a lot of the vegetarians get a lot of, right? Wheats, rice, corn, apples, bananas, broccoli, cauliflower, avocados, all those things are carbohydrates. So we can break down carbohydrates into really 3 different types of food sources. So the first of which are simple carbohydrates. Now when you hear that carbs are bad for you, these are really the guys that are kind of the culprits. These are the ones that you want to try to avoid or at least try to minimize. There's certainly room for a little bit in your diet, but if you want to be more healthy, it's these simple carbohydrates. They're also called sugars that you want to try to avoid. What we're discovering is, particularly if you're talking about weight and trying to lose weight and things like that, it turns out that it's not really fat that makes us fat, it's sugar. If we can learn to minimize the amount of sugar in our diets, we can be much, much more healthy. So there's very little value, nutritive value, for just plain simple sugars. We can break these down into different types also. The most simplest type of a simple carbohydrate or sugar is a monosaccharide, mono meaning 1. So these are kind of single molecules. There are 3 of them. Probably have heard these before: glucose, fructose, and galactose. So those are the most basic simple sugars. If you combine any two of those, so if you add glucose and fructose together, you get a disaccharide. Di meaning two in this case, and glucose plus fructose gives you sucrose. Sucrose is probably the most famous. That is simple table sugar. Also brown sugar, honey, molasses, all that stuff kind of falls under sucrose. There are other types too. Lactose is milk sugar. Maltose comes from malt, that sort of thing. So disaccharides are just slightly more complex monosaccharides, but still give you the same basic idea. Sucrose is sweet because fructose is sweet. Glucose is not. So there are lots of health concerns with having too much sugar intake. The primary one is obesity, but also other risks of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, all sorts of bad things. So please try to minimize sugars. One of the biggest culprits are soft drinks. So knock out soft drinks, knock out candy bars, and you've probably cut your sugar intake by quite a bit. So how about the good carbs? What do you want? You want complex carbohydrates. There are three kind of primary types: starches, and these are found in grains, potatoes, corns, nuts, seeds, legumes. These are the good things. Also, these are sometimes called polysaccharides. So we went from monosaccharides to disaccharides, now to polysaccharides. Poly meaning many, saccharides put together. Starches are one form of that. These are good for you. You want to particularly focus on these in your diet. Lots of fruits, lots of vegetables give you starch. Another one are the dextrins. These all come from plant origins, and you get a lot of fiber from these. Fiber will be the next type. And then there's this interesting thing called glycogen. So your body's primary fuel source, what your body likes to use to burn fuel, to give you calories so that you can do work, is glucose, that monosaccharide that we just mentioned. So it'll break down a starch and it will save it as glucose, or go into your body as glucose. The storage form of glucose in the body is called glycogen. There's not a huge difference chemically between glucose and glycogen, but glycogen refers to what's being stored in the body. Glucose is kind of free floating, also called blood sugar, by the way. So these guys, these complex carbs, starch, dextrins, glycogen, these give you lots of valuable nutrients, things that you need, one of which, probably the most important of which, is fiber. So let's take a quick look at fiber. Now, fiber is an interesting carbohydrate because it doesn't actually give you any energy. There's no calories to be found in fiber. And dietary fiber is what we're kind of looking at. It's non-digestible, meaning it doesn't break down. It has other functions as it goes through your stomach and small and then large intestines. So where does it come from? This is entirely plant sources. Okay, the leaves, the skins, the roots, the seeds, all good stuff that you want to be trying to eat. And the important thing about these different dietary fibers is they decrease your risk for lots of type of diseases. I'll show you a couple of those here in just a minute. So how much fiber should you get in your diet? And this is particularly for people under the age of 50. Which is probably everyone listening to this right now. So if you're a woman, because you're a little bit smaller, 25 grams per day, and if you're a male, 38 grams per day. So there is a table in the book where you can find the fiber content of different foods, but typically if you're thinking fruits and vegetables, you're doing pretty good with fiber. So we classify fiber based on how it dissolves in water, okay, which we call solubility for you chemistry people. So there's two types of fiber. One is soluble, meaning it completely dissolves in water, forms a gel-like substance. This stuff is particularly good in helping to lower blood cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol is one of those things that leads to heart attacks and different cardiovascular diseases and stuff. You want fairly low cholesterol, particularly bad cholesterol. We're not going to get into the different types of cholesterol here today. And also helps to lower blood sugar levels too, which is blood sugar levels are a particular problem for diabetics and such. There's also then insoluble fiber, which does not dissolve in water. And this increases the peristalsis. And what those is just kind of waves and how the food moves through your system, right? It leaves the stomach, goes into the small intestines. From the small intestines, it goes to the large intestines. It has to move through there somehow. That moving motion is called peristalsis. And it helps to get things those waste products primarily. By the time they're in the large intestines, there's not really no nutritional value left. Trying to get it out of the body, that sort of thing, and it helps to move through the large intestines, which is also called the colon, more quickly. Because of that, insoluble fiber in particular helps to reduce the risk of colon cancer. Again, colon just refers to your large intestines. So those are carbohydrates. The next the next group of nutrients we want to look at is fats, which also called lipids. Fats are solid at room temperature. Lipids are liquid at room temperature, the only difference between those two words. Now, this is the most concentrated energy source, meaning that per gram you get 9 calories. So it's more than twice as calorically dense as what carbohydrates and what we'll see with proteins here in just a minute, but 9 calories per gram. So there are several different functions of fat in the body. It gives you energy. In fact, most of your stored energy is in the form of fat. Your body does not store a ton of glycogen. It prefers to store fat. And if you have a big belly or something like that, that is primarily your stored energy. It also insulates to help preserve body heat. Gives different fatty acids, which can be used for several different things. And one that you may not think of, it also carries the 4 fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. I can remember fat-soluble vitamins as all dogs eat kittens or all dads eat kids, A, D, E, and K. And if it's not fat-soluble, it's water-soluble. We'll come back to that with the vitamins here in a minute. So fat has several different functions in the body as well. So there are different types of fats. Fat can be a simple fat is just a glyceride molecule. Let's not really worry about what that looks like, but a glyceride molecule linked to different types of fatty acids. And depending on how many fatty acids will determine the type of fat. If there's one fatty acid, it's a monoglyceride. If it's 2 fatty acids, it's a di. And then the primary storage form of fats in the body is triglycerides, meaning that it's a glyceride molecule with 3 fatty acid molecules attached to it. In fact, more than 95% of the fat in the body is in triglycerides. So if you want to squish your tummy and wonder what is that fat in there, well, it's mostly triglycerides, which is a glyceride with 3 fat molecules attached to it, fatty acid molecules attached to it. So fats vary in length. So think about carbons, and if you're familiar with chemistry, particularly organic chemistry, everything is based on carbon. So when you hear carbon chain, visualize a C with a line next to it, a minus sign, for instance, another C, minus sign, another C, minus sign, and that is kind of this carbon chain. Each carbon can attach to a certain number of hydrogens. So visualize, if you would, that C attached to another C with the line. Imagine coming up from the top of the C, another line, this time vertical, and an H attached to that. And to the bottom of the C, another vertical line with an H attached to that. So those are carbons and hydrogens. And what we're interested in, as far as fats go, is how many hydrogen are attached to how many carbons. So, and you can break that down into 2 different types. It's either an unsaturated fat, and by the way, those are the healthy fats that you find in plant products, which you want to have in your diet, and we'll tell you which those are in just a minute. And actually, there are 2 different types. Monounsaturated, which you can guess probably means one of something, I'll tell you what, and then polyunsaturated means many of something. Saturated fats, which are the other type, come primarily from animal origins. So you think of bacon grease, for instance. It's delicious. It's really bad for you. Most fat that comes from red meats that come out of steaks and things like that is all going to be saturated. Not very good for you. I'm going to try to focus on plant sources. So we'll break down what both of these are here. Start with the saturated ones, saturated fatty acids. You can call them saturated fats. So what that means is every carbon, so visualize again that line of carbons, and every single carbon has enough hydrogens attached to it, one on the top and one on the bottom, essentially. So there's single bonds, if you're really interested in the chemistry of it all. Single bonds link the carbon atoms to the chain to each other. But every carbon is maxed out on the number of hydrogens that it can have. That's why it's called saturated. The carbons are fully saturated with hydrogens. So what does that look like on a non-chemical level? Well, if you went to your kitchen and you thought, what is a saturated fat? Here's a very good way to tell. It's solid at room temperature. Margarine, butter, baking grease, things like that, solid at room temperatures. Those are fats, okay? One way you can think about it to remember that saturated fats, S saturated, S solid, and if it's solid at room temperature, it's going to be solid in your heart, and that's what's going to kill you. You want to try to minimize those. So here's some of the foods with saturated fats. Again, I already mentioned this, but meats, whole milk has a lot of fat in it, so whole milk ice creams, hydrogenated oils, cakes, cookies, muffins, salad dressings. So all those things that taste really, really good, and one of the reasons they taste really, really good is because saturated fats taste fantastic. Unfortunately, they're just not good for you at all. So the kind that you want to focus on are these unsaturated. So what these mean now, so saturated had hydrogens attached to it. With an unsaturated, it means at least one carbon does not have a hydrogen atom attached to it. So the double bonds so instead of a bond going to hydrogen and to the carbon next to it, both of the bonds go to the carbon next to it. And so there's essentially an open slot above the C where a hydrogen could attach. So it's called unsaturated because not all the carbons are fully saturated with hydrogens. These are liquid at room temperature. So you think of like the olive oil that may be sitting on your counter at home, canola oil, different things like that. So the unsaturated are the healthies. So and we can actually break these down into to two different types, mono unsaturated. So what that refers to, mono meaning one, you can probably guess that there's one carbon that does not have a hydrogen attached to it. And we'll actually come back to those here in just a minute. And which carbon it is actually is important. But these guys, oil, canola, rapeseed, peanut, those kind of things. Then there's also polyunsaturated, so there's more than, in this case, more than one carbon that does not have a hydrogen attached to it. And you see some of the examples there. So, and then we got this case of omega-3s. You've probably heard of omega-3s, maybe not omega-6s, what that refers to. So if you can visualize, again, this carbon chain, C minus sign attached to it. The left-hand side is called the alpha side. The right-hand side is called the omega side, right? Alpha and omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. So if it's an omega-3, you're thinking the carbon on the right side back up 1, 2, 3 carbon molecules. That third carbon molecule doesn't have a hydrogen attached to it. Thus, it's an omega-3 fatty acid. If it's an omega-6, I bet you can figure out, you go to the right side of that carbon chain, you back up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. That's the carbon that does not have a hydrogen attached to it. Because it's only one, these are also under the mono unsaturated. So where that carbon or where that hydrogen is missing, whether it's in that 3 slot or the 6 slot, is incredibly important. And actually just that one little change has a big difference on how healthy or unhealthy that particular fatty acid is in the body. Think about both omega-3s and omega-6s, as your body cannot manufacture them, so you have to get them from outside of your diet. So do want omega-3s, okay? So, and here's a big bunch of reasons why. All kinds of good stuff for increasing the amount of omega-3 fatty acids in your diet. Cholesterol, inflammation, all kinds of things there. Here's some more. Decreases your risk for heart attack. Other things like decreasing your risk for Alzheimer's and dementia. Dementia's in the news a lot with concussions and stuff and CTE. So all those things can be mitigated by increasing your omega-3s. So probably the question you should be asking yourself, with all these great benefits of omega-3s, where do I get omega-3s? Easiest answer is fish, particularly salmon. Eat lots of salmon, within reason. Okay, there are other places. Flaxseed, which you can buy ground up and put mix with in drinks and stuff. Canola oils, walnuts, and those are all natural things. Green leafy vegetables. So lettuces and kale and different things like that are very, very good for you and give you those omega-3s. See what's this here. You may want to take a look at that, but this is just a picture of what I just said. The omega-6s, these are polys, and come from most of these. Most polyunsaturated come from the omega-6, and there are three primary ones: linoleic. These sometimes come up: gamma-linoleic, GLA, and I'm not going to worry a whole lot more about those because they're not something you necessarily have to have in your diet like omega-3s. There's one more type of fat that we need to mention that is not natural. So saturated, unsaturated, and then the subcategories are natural. Then there's these trans fats, which are these are made in a laboratory. They're not natural. They don't happen in nature. And they're kind of like Frankenstein. They're created in a lab, and their entire job is to try to kill you, because that's what they do. Boy, oh boy, they taste good, but they're not natural. How do they come about? Where we add a hydrogen to the monounsaturated and those polyunsaturated, and it helps to increase its life shelf. So it's kind of changing the unsaturated to a saturated unnaturally. Okay. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, if you're selling spam, for instance, not the kind of email that you get, but the actual food, you can increase its shelf life by using trans fats, right? And that's good for you. If your product, as a manufacturer, that's good for you. If your product sits on the shelf longer, that's good. You think of fresh fruits and vegetables, right? Their life cycle is really short. The shelf life is very short. So it's either eaten or bought or it's thrown away. If you can increase shelf life, that's good for them. Turns out it's really bad for humans, and you'll see this in things like margarines, crackers, cookies, and lots of health risks with these. They're not good for your heart. These are kind of on their way out. We're now aware of the health problems with these, so you don't see this as much. In fact, you'll see a lot of trans fat-free advertising and stuff. There are a couple of other certain compound fats also, and these are just a combination of the simple fats with other things. So you got things like phospholipids, lipoproteins, glucoproteins. These are important in physiology and stuff like that. So if you're interested, take a physiology class. So you can also get derived fats too. And so these may be something like cholesterol. They don't dissolve in water, but it's considered a derived fat. At the end of the coal kind of gives you, or sorry, at the beginning of the coal kind of clues you into that it's a fat or related to a fat. So the third type and the last of the energy producing nutrients is protein. Now, protein has a very different job. It gives you energy, but that's not what it wants to do. Protein is used primarily to build your body. Okay, it's the building blocks of the body. Think of it as the bricks and the mortar of your body. Okay, so repairs body tissues. When you work out, particularly with weights, you break down the protein that's in your muscles. You need new protein to help regenerate your muscles, to make them bigger, stronger, faster, that sort of thing. They also form not just in muscles, but also big parts of hormones, big parts of enzymes, big parts of antibodies. So you absolutely have to have protein in your diet. If you do not have enough carbohydrate or fat in your diet, then your body will start using protein in order to give itself the energy that it needs. And it comes in at 4 calories per gram. And typically the only time that you're going to be using protein is in a starvation type situation. The amount that you use in a normal everyday kind of way is fairly negligible, but it does have a caloric value of 4 calories per gram, just like the carbohydrates did. So where do we get these guys? These are meats. Also meat alternatives. Think of something like tofu, particularly if you're a vegetarian. You can also get this from milk and dairy products too. So yogurts and things like that will sometimes have protein. But you can also get it through legumes and beans, different things like that. But for most Americans who are not vegetarians, it comes from meat. So beef, pork, chicken, fish, those things. So what makes up proteins are amino acids. There are 20 of those. We don't expect you to know those for this class. But amino acids differ from the previous two. Carbs and fats are both made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, proteins are a little bit different in that they also have nitrogen in them. Okay, so they still got the C, the H, and the O, but they also have nitrogen, which makes them much more difficult to break down in the body, which is one reason your body does not like to use them for energy. So there are different types of amino acids. So just so we're on the same page, there's 20 different types of amino acids. In different combinations, they make up proteins. Okay, you don't have to have all 20 of those amino acids to make proteins. In fact, the different combinations of the amino acids give you different types of proteins. Okay, but we can break amino acids down into two different groups. Essential means that you have to have them in your diet because your body does not make them. Non-essential amino acids mean that they're produced by your body. Okay, so your body makes those. So between those two, there are 20 that you have to get. All 20 of them are important for different types of proteins, either for making skin or for making muscle or helping with blood or those hormones or those enzymes or what have you. There's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian and not eating meat. The problem that you have to worry about with being a vegetarian is getting enough of these essential amino acids because your body doesn't make them. So if you're not eating meat, a piece of meat, by the way, has all 20 of these. So you don't have to worry about it. But if you're not eating meat, then you may not get all 20 of those, and so you have to be sure that you're getting them from other places. So depending on the type of protein that you're thinking about, so it's a piece of meat or it's tofu or it's yogurt, it's either complete, and if it's a complete protein, then it has all the amino acids that you need. If it's incomplete, then it's lacking at least one of those. So if it's incomplete, then you need to be worried about complementing your proteins, in which you have to find different sources, right? So if it's not meat and it's missing one of the 20, then you're going to have to find another source. So combining grains and legumes together, for instance, could be a way to get all 20 of them. Just a general recommendation to try to limit red meat, which is delicious but also very high in saturated fat, which you need to try to limit in your diet. In fact, we recommend just half a serving per day, which is not very much. A serving of protein or serving of meat, by the way, is the size of a deck of cards. So we're talking half of the size of a deck of cards per day, or 2 to 3 servings per week of red meat specifically. They also recommend that you get protein throughout each meal, so not just saving it for dinner and eating a gigantic steak at dinner, but this is important for things like being satiety, just means being full, right? Feeling satisfied after you eat a meal. Also, helps with weight management and helps to rebuild lean tissue, primarily muscles. In fact, one way to do that is consuming protein and calcium together in the same meal. That can help with bone growth. And so try to distribute it throughout the day. If you're exercising, by the way, it's particularly important within about 30 minutes after your exercise to replenish some protein so that your body can start rebuilding those muscles. So how much do you need? So if you are sedentary, you need about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so we think in pounds for the most part. To get kilograms, you take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2. So just for discussion's sake, let's say you weigh 220 pounds. Okay, that would be, divide that by 2.2, you'd weigh 100 kilograms. If you're sedentary at 0.8, that would mean at 100 kilograms, you would need 80 grams of protein per day. Okay, and you can see if you're physically active how much you need. If you're an athlete, you need a little bit more. If you're trying to gain or lose weight, even just a teeny bit more on the low end. So this is a good guide on how much you need, but it's completely determined by what your body weight is. Hope that makes sense. So let's move on to the non-energy producing nutrients. The first of which is vitamins. So these don't give you energy. They have other functions. They work as antioxidants. They work as coenzymes. And they're always classified based on how they dissolve in water. Okay, already mentioned the 4 fat solubles, A, D, E, and K. All dogs eat kittens is the best way to remember those. And if it's not fat soluble, it is water soluble. And those are the whole collection of B complex vitamins and C. So we don't call them like B12 or B1, B2 anymore. Now it's niacin, riboflavin, nucleic acid, different things like that. And C. C is also included in those. Your body makes some of these. A, D, and K are made by the body. Everything else you have to have in your diet, and you need all of the vitamins in order to be healthy. So vitamin A is made from beta-carotene, which comes from vegetables. Think of carrots, peppers, different things like that have beta-carotene in them. Kind of gives that orange color. Vitamin D is an interesting one. Actually, that's the benefit of being out in the sun. So The more tan you are, probably the more vitamin D you generate. If you're very, very fair skinned, you probably don't generate a whole lot of vitamin D and need to supplement on it. And vitamin K is actually produced by bacteria that live in your stomach. So you need those guys. That's all we're going to say about vitamins. You could spend a ton of time on vitamins, but it gets very heavy into the chemistry very quickly. So we'll move on. Vitamins, by the way, are organic, meaning they have a carbon in them somewhere, and that's how they differ from minerals, which are inorganic. Okay, no carbon in them. These guys you're going to find on the periodic table of the elements. So every cell in your body has a mineral in it, at least one. Particularly things like bones, nails, and teeth, which are very high in something like calcium, um, are very, very mineral based. These guys have a lot of different roles in the body, everything from helping to maintain your water balance. Sodium plays a big role in that. Acid-base balance, like pH. Also in different respiratory pigments, enzymes, enzyme systems, and also help to regulate muscle and nervous tissue excitability, meaning that your muscles don't contract without different minerals. So, and because these things get very, very complex, we're going to kind of end it with that also. Again, if you took a full-blown nutrition class, you would learn more than you want to know about both vitamins and minerals. The sixth and final type of nutrient is water. We need more of this than anything because there are a lot of roles in your body. It's the most important nutrient. Your body is about 50% water. Your muscles themselves are about 75% water. It's look at all these roles that it plays. Digestion, absorption, it doesn't give you energy, but you have to have water in order to produce energy. Helps to circulate. Obviously, blood is primarily water. Regulates body temperature and electrolyte balance by sweating, things like that. Helps to remove waste, both pee and poo. Helps to rebuild and build cells, transport again through the blood, through the lymph, different things like that. And also in your joints itself, where bursa exists, it also gives cushioning too. So incredibly important, got to have it. You can only go about 3 days without water. So pretty much all food contains some water. A lot of fruits and vegetables are primarily water. There's a ton of it. Most of the time, we drink enough by using thirst as our guide, and thirst works well if you're not sweating a lot. If you sweat a lot through exercise or something, then thirst is not a very good guide. Actually, the system starts to break down. So you need more water when exercising and heat. And really, the best way to tell if you're properly hydrated is by looking at your urine. If your urine is very pale yellow, moving into clear, you're hydrated. If it's deep yellow and has a much stronger scent to it, you're probably dehydrated. And by the way, pretty much anything counts as drinking water now. So obviously drinking water itself is the best thing, but any fluid, most fluid is still 90% water. So, okay, those are the 6 different groups. We've still got lots more to cover here. We're going to look at some different nutritional standards. How do we determine, or we being scientists and stuff, how do they determine how much you need? There's different ways. Probably the most readily available one are what are called dietary reference intakes. And there are 4 different types of nutrient standards, and we'll look at all 4 of these in the next in the next couple slides here, and then a couple of other things like the daily values. So just real quickly, these ears, what is the average requirement? This is how much of this particular nutrient, whatever it happens to be, carbs, fat, protein, a particular vitamin, how much do you need to meet the requirement for half of the healthy people in a specific age and gender group? Okay, so you might want to pause, write that down, and kind of ponder that a little bit. There's a lot of words there. It's not particularly hard to understand. There's just kind of a lot there. RDAs are pretty popular. This is the amount considered adequate to meet the needs of most healthy people in the United States, and there is a table that refers to those in the book, so feel free to take a look at that. Adequate intakes, how much do you need? How much do you, when there's not enough sufficient data available to calculate an EAR and RDA, how much do they think that you need? And some minerals, for instance, would just have AIs because we do not have an RDA or an EAR for them. And then there's the other end. How much is too much? What is the upper level, tolerable upper level before you start to see adverse health effects? So how much is the safe amount? Iron, for instance, if you have too much iron in your diet, or sodium is probably the most famous one. What happens if you have too much sodium in your diet? And there's lots of bad things that kind of happen with that. So there are also ULs. Probably the one that we see, and there's table 5.4 to look at to take a look at those. Probably what we see the most of, though, are daily values. So this is what you see on food labels. So if you flip over a food label, this is you're looking at the daily value. So by the way, those are always based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So if you eat more than that, then those percentages don't fit you. If you eat less than 2,000 calories, they also do not fit you. So it's based on an average diet of 2,000 calories. So you have to adjust that based on your estimated energy requirements, which you have either talked about in this class or will look at later. I'm not sure what period, what point in time that comes, but you will look at EER and you'll actually calculate that. So on that you can see in figure 5.2. So here is kind of a current chart of how much of each of these you should get. So don't be confused. If you add all these together, that's going to be a lot more than 100%. That's because simple and complex fall under carbohydrates. So of your diet, which 50%, this is what is current. It's recommended, so that's kind of right in the middle of that. Break that down into 26% are simple, which is way too much sugar, and 24% is complex, which is not nearly enough, up to 40% of maybe up to 65%. So same thing here, monos, polys, and saturateds fall under protein. So this number used to saturated fats is probably the most important one to look at. The average diet gets 13% of their calories per day from saturated fats. The recommendation is less than 6. Used to be 10, and we're learning more and more about how unhealthy saturated fats are, so it's down to 6%. Protein, big range here, anywhere from 10 to 35% of your diet. People that need more protein are going to be more physically active. Athletes are going to fall much closer to up here. Okay, the more physically active, the more protein that you need. All right, the average American gets 16% of their diet. You can see when this came from, 2002. It's the most recent that we have, at least in this book. So that's a little bit old now, but at least gives you a general idea. So if you wanted to calculate, so here are the calories per gram. Again, carbs, protein are both at 4, fat is at 9. We didn't talk about alcohol, but that comes in at 7, so kind of between carbs and fat there. And let's say a serving is 120 calories, and you want to calculate the amount of, or there's 5 grams of fat. So by going through this, and this is just simple math equations, and you can pause it and kind of think of it. At the end of the day, we can figure that 38% of those calories were from fat. So if we go back to this, it said 34, or you should have be between 20 and 35%. This particular food was at 38%. Probably not a great food to eat. Okay, but pause that, take a look at it, make sure you understand how to do this math. It's fairly simple, but make sure you can get to how they ended up with this from up here, 120 calories, and with 5 grams of fat down to 38%. So within your lifetimes, we have moved from the food guide pyramid to MyPlate. And myplate.gov is actually a pretty good website. It's got a lot of really good stuff there for determining your diet and nutrition. So one thing that I would particularly note on this, and kind of the recommendation is half of your plate should consist of fruits and vegetables. Okay. And then grains and protein. So again, this is using not carbs, fat, protein, but using the food groups, fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, that sort of thing. But big take-home message, half of every meal should be fruits and vegetables, okay? So maybe if you get a chance, go to myplate.gov and play around with that a little bit, see what it says. There's some good stuff there. So this is kind of here's your basis for a good, healthy diet, at least in America. Lots of vegetables, lots of fruits. Okay, they should be the thrust of your diet. I know that's not where most of us are at, but that's the recommendation. Whole grains. So avoiding simple sugars, avoiding candy bars, avoiding white bread, that thing like white rice and bleached noodles and things like that. But whole grain stuff gives you a lot of fiber, other nutrients. And then low fat milk. So 0.5%, 1%. Gives you lots of good things, calcium, potassium, vitamin D, protein. So, and how much fish or different meats, 3 to 6 ounces daily. Again, that's about the size of a deck of cards or so. That's not that much, by the way. When was the last time you went to a restaurant and ordered a steak and it came out the size of a deck of cards? You'd probably be asking for your money back. So if you want to have a balanced diet, try to avoid excessive fats, particularly the bad ones, those saturated fats. Try to avoid oils as much as you can. The sweets, they're delicious. Try to find things that are low in salt, and avoiding alcohol as much as possible also. So that's not to say there's not room for some of that, okay? It's just excessive, right? When your diet is based on fats and sweets, Pop-Tarts for breakfast, Chick-fil-A for lunch, and a pizza for dinner, you can probably be a little bit more healthy than that. Get more fiber. What's the best way to get more fiber? Eat more fruits and vegetables. That's fairly simple, actually. And get the minimum number of servings based on my plate. And the website can actually, myplate.gov, can calculate how much you need based on your age and gender and weight and stuff like that. So you're going to do a nutrient analysis and try to help to balance your diet, or at least make you aware of what your diet looks like. So there is a form to record that. You're actually going to use uh, myfitnesspal.com to do that. That's all on Blackboard. But here's another way if you wanted to do that. You could come up with a plan. You don't have to do that for this class, just what's on Blackboard. But there it is if you want to take a look at it, if you want to pause it and write that down. That's fine. Another way that you can do that is go back so you can get that, the choosemyplate.gov website. Here's some other ways if you want to take a look at that through our book. You can do that as well. So kind of going to end with some special topics. There are several, so I say end, that's relative. The first is vegetarianism. So this is kind of sweeping the nation. It's very popular right now, and you know this, but a vegetarian just avoids different types of meats and tries to use everything that is plant origin. So there are different types. You may not be aware of all of these. There are different types. So the most strict vegetarian is called a vegan. They eat no animal products whatsoever. That would also include no eggs, no milk, nothing that comes from an animal in any way. Okay, that is a vegan. There are less strict vegetarians. So an ovo-vegetarian allows eggs in their diet, for instance. A lacto-vegetarian allows food with milk. And what do you think they call it if you allow eggs and milk in your diet? That is an ovo-lacto-vegetarian. And then there are also semi-vegetarians that may include things like fish and poultry. So this is very popular. My wife is one of these. We call her a chickenitarian. Because basically she just doesn't eat red meat. She doesn't like pork and she doesn't like beef, but she will eat chicken and fish all day long, also eggs and milk. So semi-vegetarian. So there's different levels of commitment, I guess, or however you want to think of it for vegetarianism. Now, the only problem, you can be very healthy as a vegetarian. In fact, it's a pretty healthy way to live as long as you're getting the right combinations. We're primarily thinking about those essential proteins and the non-essential proteins. You have to be able to get those because there can be nutritional deficiencies if you do not get a good mix of everything that you need. So do be aware of that. So this is where you really have to be aware of finding complementary proteins. And that's usually best if it's in the same meal. So mixing different things together to make sure you get all the essentials. Take a little bit of research to be a really good, serious vegetarian, especially a vegan. Nuts and soy are very common, and these are lots of fat, but mostly healthy, unsaturated fat. So those are good. They have lots of nutrients, so there's lots of health benefits from being a vegetarian as long as they can get the protein that they need. Another way to go about it is just soy products if you're not allergic to soy. And so you think of things like tofu, high protein. There's a thing called isoflavones that act as antioxidants, so those are important and protect against estrogen-related cancer. So particularly in females, see the word estrogen, you should think female. And there are lots of different vegetarian diets, so you can explore some of those. We don't have the time to kind of go into those now. So how about supplementation? So Supplements are fine, but they don't replace just good, healthy eating. So the best way to eat is consuming a variety of nutrient-dense foods. Okay, that is more effective than any supplementation. So supplement cannot replace the nutrients that are found in whole foods, and there are actually no clear health benefits from supplementing on most vitamins and minerals, which you might find kind of interesting. It's good to avoid megadoses unless you have a particular problem. Now, there are certain diseases and ailments where you are required to megadose on some vitamins or minerals. Again, we're talking about in general, on average, what the average person would need to do. So be aware of that. So, for instance, here's some of those special cases. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you need more iron. And then some adults do have nutrient deficiencies for various reasons, so they would need to supplement. Antioxidants, just real quick, there are things called free radicals float around in your blood and cells that damage cell membranes and DNAs, and antioxidants absorb those. And antioxidants, this may not come as a surprise, come from fruits and vegetables. So the most common, vitamin E, C, beta carotene, and selenium. So, and here's how much of those you need. I'll put these up here and you can pause it to take a look, just kind of understand that real quick. Okay, multivitamins. Lots of people grew up taking multivitamins, maybe Flintstones or something like that. I take a daily multivitamin just to make sure I get enough of everything that I need. Although maybe it's a waste of money because there's not any real solid evidence that shows that it decreases cardiovascular disease or cancers, so they can help fill certain deficiencies. If you don't get enough vitamin C in your diet, supplementing could help with that. So, quick highlight on vitamin D. Has lots of functions, including anti-cancer properties and decreasing inflammation, which is never good. And also need need vitamin D in different forms to help absorb calcium. Again, calcium is important for bones and teeth and things like that. So this is the one again that comes from access to the sun. So people in the South actually get more vitamin D, generate more vitamin D via the sun than people that live in, say, Minnesota or Wisconsin. So you can also get it through food sources, and those are all fish, if you're not familiar. But the best source is sunshine. So what if you can't get it though, such as during the winter months, then maybe do some supplementing with vitamin D3. There are different types of vitamin D, by the way. D3 is one of them. Folate, also called folic acid. This one is particularly important for females because growing babies in utero need this. So having good amounts of folate or folic acid help prevent some birth defects, protects the mother from some cancers, and can also help prevent heart attacks in the mother too. So this is also better to obtain from natural food, although very, very common when a woman is pregnant that the doctor will recommend supplementing on folate because the baby actually sucks all the folate out of the mother's system and leaves her with none. So what are some of the benefits of food? So the best nutrition strategy is choosing a wide variety of foods. Diets that forbid a particular food group, such as carbohydrates, is not a good answer for long-term success with your diet. There is room for absolutely every type of food. It's the amount that you get. Okay, so vitamin, mineral, fiber supplements do not give you. It's not the same as getting it naturally in your food. It's always better to eat an apple than to take a pill that simulates an apple. Okay, so many of these things work together. So if you're not getting them through whole foods and you're just supplementing them, then you might not be getting the full enhancing potential of whatever it is. So supplementation never offsets poor eating habits. Okay, getting whole foods, lots of fresh fruits, lots of fresh vegetables, fresh meat, fresh dairy. That's the way to go. Okay. So something else you can do though, probiotics. This is kind of a new thing. Lots of new science coming about probiotics. Yogurt is a very typical source. Contains probiotics. Probiotics are microorganisms. They're actually living creatures inside your intestines. You have to have them. Everybody does. So it can help with gastrointestinal infections, GI stuff. Help decrease gas, for instance. Also helps boost immune activity, fight certain types of cancers. There's also some evidence that can help it fight different types of food allergies. Probiotics, just be aware that those are out there. This is a new area that's really growing right now. So a quick caution about fish: you always have to be wary of mercury, which you do not want in your diet. That's not a mineral. It's not something, or it is a mineral, but it's not one that you want in your diet. So 2 servings of fish per week are recommended because the benefits of the omega-3s outweigh the risk of mercury. So another topic, which are called ages. These are bad, and because they help the increase aging, chronic diseases, things like that. These are usually found in foods that are uh, broiled, fried, different things like that. They taste good. Oh, beware of them. Next kind of major topic here, eating disorders. So obviously we don't have time to give you a really good understanding of eating disorders. You can take entire classes on these eating disorders. So I'm just going to give a really brief overview. But these are medical illnesses, okay? This is something that should be taken very, very seriously, but it's usually characterized by intense fear of becoming fat, and usually coming from an environmental pressure. So the 3 primary ones: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder, or BED. And we'll look at each of these here very briefly. So just in general, though, that these 3 eating disorders are most prevalent in women, kind of early career to mid-career women, although it certainly happens, and we're seeing it happen earlier and younger in women. Often it's about 10% are male. This is not only a female problem, it does happen. And by the way, those 3 eating disorders are not the only ones. There are several others, some like body dysmorphic disorder, anorexia athletica, different things like that, may be more common in men, but we just gave you the 3 most common. So often this is a coping mechanism to deal with other issues that may be going on, and sometimes are triggered by stress and inability to cope with that. So the first is anorexia nervosa, and kind of the highlights of that is the fear of weight gain is greater than the fear of death. So oftentimes people will die from this because they refuse to eat. They have a distorted image of the body. Kind of classic thing is this incredibly skeletal figure looking into a mirror and seeing somebody that is very fat. So there's a preoccupation with food and meal planning, and the criteria for diagnosing this clinically, there are several, and these happen over a period of time. This isn't a one-time kind of thing. It's a pattern of behavior. But refusing to maintain a minimal body weight, intense fear of gaining weight, an altered perception of how one looks, and in females in particular, amenorrhea, which simply means ceasing the menstrual cycle, so not having monthly periods anymore. So it requires professional help. This is not something that you get over. You wouldn't treat cancer on your own typically. You also do not treat disorders like this on your own. It takes professional help. The other one is, or second one, bulimia nervosa. This is more prevalent, and this is a mostly well-educated. People that do this are typically well-educated, near recommended weight, emotionally insecure, and lacking self-esteem. So, and with this one, there's a binge purge cycle. So lots of eating, throwing it up. Lots of eating, throwing it up. Okay, so eating large and uncontrollable amounts. There's a short period of satisfaction, followed by guilt, shame, and fear, and then the purging, which is simply throwing up. There are some diagnostic criteria for this one also. So recurring incidences of binge eating, lack of control, and inappropriate compensatory behaviors. So such as vomiting, which is probably the most famous one, but also using laxatives, diuretics, other things like that, or either fasting or excessive exercise also. So kind of these have to occur regularly for so long. Twice a week for 3 months is kind of the minimum. There's also an undue emphasis on body weight and shape, that sort of thing. A newer one that is really kind of hit, and America is very, very good at this. The causes are unknown, can be triggered by depression, anger, sadness, or simply boredom, which is kind of scary. So in this case, it's not too different from bulimia, except there's no purging. So this person may be overweight or obese. And basically what you do is eat an unusually large amount of food until you feel uncomfortably full, out of control eating, eating faster than usual, eating alone because of embarrassment, feeling disgusted, depressed, guilty for doing those sorts of things. Something very common in our society is emotional eating, right? Comfort food. Ice cream is very popular for that. Break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and you turn to Dr. Ice Cream for therapy. Not a great way to do that. Foods also have a nostalgic and sentimental appeal. You think of going home for family Thanksgiving or family Sunday dinner, those sorts of things. And usually it's the unhealthy stuff, right? Think about your Thanksgiving dinner. Not a lot of healthy stuff. Even the sweet potatoes we turn into yams, right? So it is really problematic for people that are trying to watch their weight, by the way. So how do we treat clinical eating disorders? Counseling center. Got to go and see somebody. Local hospitals, support groups, and communities. Eating disorders are no laughing matter. These need to be treated. So do what you have to do in order to make sure that you're healthy, your friends are healthy. So just a couple more things here. So dietary guidelines, 2 keys for those: balancing calories with physical activity. So it's a mixture of both, right? Calories in through what you eat, calories out by the activity that you do. Those have to be balanced. And then focusing on nutrient-dense foods. So if you want to manage your weight, not everybody does, but a lot of people do. If you want to manage your weight, so the best way to do that, improve eating and improve your physical activity. You can't outrun a bad diet, okay? Let me say that again. You cannot outrun a bad diet. What that means is that regardless of what physical activity you're doing, if you're not also improving your nutrition, it doesn't matter, okay? Nutrition is so important when it comes to managing weight. So control your total caloric intake. You can track that. That's one thing that MyFitnessPal allows you to do. Increase your physical activity. Just do a little bit more. Walk more. Go for a run. You know, those sorts of things. This class kind of requires you to do that. So maintain an appropriate balance depending on what stage in life you're in. If you're a college athlete right now, you got to eat a lot more because you're moving a whole lot, right? If you were a high school athlete and no longer, there's a reason of the freshman 15, because people tend to be more active in high school than they were in college, but then don't change their eating habits to match the new, more sedentary lifestyle. Decrease your sodium. Try to have less than 6% saturated fats and minimize trans fats also. Here's a few more. Reduce solid fats and added sugars. Try to avoid simple sugars as much as possible. Limit your consumption of red meat, refined grains. Drinking, you know, on this campus it's one thing, but do so in moderation. From a health perspective, we're not talking from a moral, ethical perspective, but from a health perspective, moderate drinking, okay? And limit highly processed foods. So if you absolutely love Spam, Slim Jims, things like that, might want to rethink that strategy. Here's a few foods that you should try to increase. More fruits and vegetables. Can't say that enough. More fruits and vegetables. More whole grains. More low-fat dairy products. More lean proteins. So we're thinking chicken, fish, things like that. More seafood. Healthy fats. Those unsaturated fats. Olive oils, particularly extra virgin olive oils. Foods that are high in fiber, calcium, potassium, vitamin D. So again, going back to very colorful fruits and vegetables. Your plate should be a rainbow. Oranges, greens, blues, reds, all those different colors. The more colors, the better. Okay, a couple things on special populations. So women who are capable of becoming pregnant. So thinking about having a baby, look at foods that supply heme iron. So you need more iron, okay? So more meat, that sort of thing. Other vitamin C rich foods, and consuming more folic acid also, which I already mentioned once. So once you become pregnant, women, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you need get a little bit more seafood for those omega-3s. Do be aware of mercury, so limiting white tuna, not eating things like towfish, shark, swordfish, king mackerel. Don't have a lot of that in our area anyway. If you're pregnant, maybe take an iron supplement as advised. And if you happen to be more than 50 years old, that's nothing to do with being a woman or pregnant, but if you just happen to be more than 50, consuming more foods with vitamin B12. So we're almost there. 2 slides left. How do you commit to this for a lifetime? Diets don't do it. diets almost always fail. The success rate of diets is incredibly low. So how do you contribute to a long, good quality of life? Proper eating, just getting the right amounts of the good foods. Good exercise program, just being more active and moving around. And then we'll even throw smoking on there. Don't do it. Put yourself in an early grave. So a well-balanced diet, lots of foods from all the food groups. There's room for everything. So find it. A Mediterranean diet, your book mentions just briefly, which is very high on olive oils, fish, fruits, and wine, by the way. Very famous for decreasing risk of heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease. Greeks, for instance, have incredibly healthy hearts. So many people don't change their dietary habits, and if you don't change your dietary habits, you're probably not going to make a good lifestyle change. If you remember pre-contemplation from the stages of trans-theological model, which was mentioned in earlier chapters, kind of in that stage there, and a famous saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, meaning having good dietary guidelines and practices now will help mitigate problems when you get older. That's all we got for nutrition. So I know there was a lot of stuff. I apologize for the length, but there's a lot of important, really good stuff here. So go out and eat healthy.